Welcome back. So all week we have talked about Ilhan Omar, the congresswoman from Minnesota, who's somehow worth more than $30 million after having a net worth of $65,000 just 3 years ago. Again, this is all public information. So how did she get all that money? How did she get all that money? And that other question, that other funny question, did she marry her brother, Ahmed Elmi, on February 12, 2009 in Eden Prairie, Minnesota? We've got the marriage certificate. She did this allegedly, reportedly, so he could get a green card. A man who divides his time between the UK and South Africa now and goes by the name Dirty Dandy on social media, and he is a dandy one. We think these are all reasonable questions to be asking, and joining us now to help us answer those questions, the most prominent Republican in the state of Minnesota, House Majority Whip and Minnesota Congressman Tom Emmer. Congressman, great to see you. I want to talk about the money first, if we could. Ilhan Omar founded this program called Feeding Our Families, which was then robbed by $250 million. 3 Somali refugees have been arrested so far. Suddenly, Ilhan's got a net worth of $30 million. Sir, do we think there could be a connection?
Oh, we better find out. And Rob, it's great to be with you. Let me just adjust a little bit of that. Ilhan Omar was instrumental, I understand, in creating the funds that were used for nutrition during the crisis known as the pandemic. There is a entity in Minnesota called Feeding Our Future that built that program out of $250 million. It was the single largest pandemic fraud case in the country. When you look, it's not just 3 people have been arrested. You've had 87 people charged in that fraud scheme, and it happens to be that 90% of them come from the Somali community in Minnesota. Did Ilhan know? I have no idea. Was Ilhan involved? I've got the same questions. How do you go from a net worth of $65,000 on a $172,000 annual salary, which, by the way, you got to pay for your health benefits, your housing, everything else? How do you go from that and suddenly have 26 to 30-some million dollars in just 3 years?
It makes no
sense. It doesn't stop there. You got to look at our governor. You got to look at our attorney general.
Yeah, I agree. It makes no sense. Look, Bernie Madoff didn't do that well in the stock market, and he was cheating. He was actually cheating the system, and his returns weren't that good. According to one report, this new CBS report, which I applaud CBS for doing this, Minnesota Somalian fraudsters went on a, quote, spending spree in which defendants, many of Somali descent, took taxpayer money meant to feed hungry children and used it to buy cars, property, and jewelry. Videos show them popping champagne at an opulent Maldives resort. In a text message, one defendant said, "You're going to be the richest 25-year-old, God willing." Congressman, how big a problem is this? And how much do you think, just your opinion, but how much do you think Ilhan Omar knew about this?
Well, it's a major problem, and I know we're talking about Ilhan, but there's a much bigger scope. If you look at it, we're talking about over $1 billion in fraud and growing, right? There's Medicaid fraud, there's the Feeding Our Future fraud, there's, I mean, it goes on and on. Yeah. You've got every aspect, thanks to Donald J. Trump, investigating this. Our U.S. Attorney, Dan Rosen, just made the statement that it goes to the highest levels of Minnesota government looking the other way. We know that Ilhan Omar is the replacement for Keith Ellison. Keith Ellison is the sitting attorney general. He and Tim Walz came in at the same time 7 years ago. And guess what, Rob? When they came in, and Ilhan has to know about this, when they came in, Keith Ellison announced there would be no more investigations without his approval. Guess what? He didn't approve any of them. And this thing has been allowed to go on. It's either the most incompetent leadership we've ever seen, or there is criminal complicity, and that's why we've got to answer the questions. If it goes to the highest levels of our government, does that include Ilhan Omar? Does that include Tim Walz? Does that include Keith Ellison? We need to find out. If it does, they need to be held accountable.
Yeah, I agree with you. Here's more from that report. Defendants from Ilhan Omar's district, by the way, Congressman, allegedly sent a, quote, confirmation email for a stay in an overwater villa with a private pool at the Radisson Blue Resort Maldives, a lakefront property in Minnesota. First-class tickets to Istanbul and Amsterdam. When Tim Walz was asked about it this week, that's the governor of Minnesota, here's his statement, quote, instead of demonizing our Somali community, we're going to do more to welcome more in. I don't know why he wants to welcome more people from Somalia in, but I do want to ask you about this as well. You're the third most prominent Republican in the House, meaning you have the power right now, and the Republicans could lose the House next November. That could happen. I hope it doesn't, but it could. So my question, why hasn't this alleged marriage to her brother been properly investigated? Why hasn't this been done? And look, I understand the statute of limitations for criminal proceedings may have expired, but I think it's probably worth embarrassing this woman if she did, in fact, marry her brother and break a federal law to get him into the country. Don't you?
Yeah, well, first off, Tim Walz, I tell you what, awful tough to be defending criminal activity. It's not that all Somalis are criminals. It just happens to be that 90% of these crimes are being committed by Somalis. This is not about being nice to our neighbors. This is about calling out criminal activity and holding people accountable. Second, this money has been going back to Somalia. It's been going to al-Shabaab. Our Treasury Secretary just announced this morning they're now looking into money service businesses which do financial transactions outside of traditional banks. That is controlled by a known terrorist group, al-Shabaab. And when you talk about Ilhan Omar, that story about her marriage was broken by a guy named Scott Johnson on Powerline years ago. This is a part of a bigger problem. We do not have a fourth establishment in Minnesota, the press, that is willing to do their job. And finally, Donald Trump calls attention to it, and everybody is starting to weigh in. Hopefully, we're going to get our answers. And people who have come to this country illegally, misrepresented themselves, guess what? I don't care what your status is. The law says you go home.
You make a good point. I'm up against a break. I've got about 15 seconds. Again, an investigation into this, what could be a sham marriage. Will you pursue that?
I think it already is being pursued. The problem that they've had is Somalia doesn't have records, so they're going to need some more DNA-type information. But absolutely, you've got to find out if people misrepresented things to get here. That's illegal. They should go home.
Yeah, we do have a marriage certificate from 2009. We even know where it happened, which I think is a lot to go on. That's a start. Tom, Emmer, have a great weekend. Thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
You too, Rob. Thanks.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.